And now, today's featured speaker is Bill Connolly from the class of 2010. Bill is a writer, marketer, and comedian. He is author of 3 books, most recently, Mindspace, How to Live a More Creative Life in the Age of Distraction, published last August. He frequently writes and speaks on topics such as soft skill development, personal and career growth, content strategy, and creative expression. He has presented or taught workshops at organizations like New York University, Allstate Insurance, and the Hearst Corporation, and his work has appeared in top media outlets such as the New York Times, Digiday, Fast Company, and Forbes. Bill is also co-founder of Triple Decker Productions, a live improv sketch comedy group based in Los Angeles, California. Without further ado, please join me in virtually welcoming Bill Connolly.
Thank you, Emily. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you to you and to Bethany for putting this together. Let me see. I just want to start this slideshow up here, and could somebody just confirm that you can see this all right as well?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, great, perfect. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I'm a proud Bentley alum, and I'm very passionate about the idea of creative expression. It's something that I've written a lot about, and I was kind of moved to write this book because of my own period of my life, which I'll get to a little bit. And I think even now more than ever, it's an important topic when people are looking to to restart habits, to restructure their lives in a way to express themselves creatively. So I want to start with a question that I ask myself every morning. I can't get over it. Is the idea of what am I waiting for? What are you waiting for? And maybe it's because I see images like this from influencers out there living their best lives. I'm constantly hounded by the idea that I'm not doing enough, that I'm not creating enough, that I'm not present enough. And this question has hounded me my entire adult life. And my creative journey probably started when I was younger, but I think for the purposes of this story, my creative journey really started in 2012. And it's Mental Health Awareness Month, and I feel really privileged that I can share my mental health story here as part of this. But in 2012, I had what amounted to a pretty substantial breakdown, an anxiety attack that continued for a period of several months. I suffer from health anxiety. I'm an extreme hypochondriac, and it manifested in a really dark way where I was living in Boston and I started kind of seeing tunnel vision. Everything around me kind of lost its color, and it made me really think about what are the things that really matter to me? What do I want to achieve in this life? And it caused me to really break down all of the habits and all the things that I've put into my day, and to really consider what it would mean for me to be successful and what things I really wanted to pursue in my life. To help me get out of that period of time, which was really dark, I turned to comedy, and that was my first creative expression that I pursued, that I fell in love with, and it helped me to really take a traumatic experience and add some positivity to it. I often joke about my own continued battle with hypochondria. I joke about some of the thought patterns that I have, some of the the experiences that I've had, because they're relatable, because everyone has something that burdens them. And comedy, as you'll notice, when you look at some of your favorite comedic patterns after life, I mean, they're all dealing with the same struggles, and yet it's sort of taboo to talk about. So I turned to comedy. I started doing improvisation, and one of the marquee concepts in improvisation is the idea of yes and, which you may be familiar with. So yes and is the idea that you take a concept, you agree to it, and then you build on top of it. Instead of saying no, we hear no so often, especially in the business world. Good idea, but no, we can't do that. There's no resources. Good idea, but we have a better one. Improv challenges you to accept every reality and build on top of it. And as you'll see, that's kind of the idea of creativity as well, is to take your personal experience and also to merge it with universal human experience. And so I fell in love with improvisation. I fell in love with comedy as comedic expression. And it did something else for me. It brought me out of a very, very dark period where I had taken a brief leave of absence from work, where I was struggling with my social relationships, where I was struggling to not judge myself for this. My life was great. How could I possibly be feeling this way? Comedy kind of helped me come out of that. And it made me really think about creativity in a more meaningful context. And so when I decided to write this book many years later now, it's because I have to say, I didn't completely come out of that. Those of you who suffer from mental health issues know that it's a constant battle. And I was saying to Emily before we got on the call, I judge myself all the time. How can I still be dealing with this when I've written 3 books about it, when I talk to people about it all the time, when I've been through intensive therapy? Because it's a journey, because it's hard to get out of this pattern. And the judgment, which I'll talk about later, the judgment of yourself for going through it is in and of itself a fairly nefarious result of having an anxiety disorder. And I realized that when I felt my most complete, my most purposeful, it's when I was creating, whether that was writing, whether that was performing. And so I started to really consider the idea of creativity. And this is the definition that I put in the book for creativity. It's probably one that you've seen elsewhere. But one piece I want to highlight is that creativity manifests in all different types of ways, whether that's literature or film, the things that you think about. But it also manifests in raising a child, building a piece of furniture for your house, tending to a garden. There are so many acts of creative expression that you probably take for granted, and we'll talk more about that. But first, let's set the stage, because when I write, I like to dive deep into the idea of what's already been out there, what research exists, and why something is important. And I think it's important to set that framework before we talk about how you can come out of this age of distraction and build your own habits to be more creative. The reality is we are born as creative leaders. Or as creative geniuses, rather. 98%, this is according to a study in 1968, where they retrofitted a NASA-based study for astronauts to the general population. And they determined that 98% of 3 to 5-year-olds profiled as genius-level creative thinkers. As you can see, over time, as we age, that number plummets dramatically until they interviewed, I think they studied over 200,000 adults with an average age of 31, and they saw that only 2% were creative thinkers at a genius level. So what that tells us is that not being creative is a learned attribute. And if that's true, then the thesis that I had is then being creative could be a learned attribute. And again, it's not something that's unique to me by any stretch of the imagination. This is something that I think we decide we are no longer creative, that we gave that up when we were kids, and we just surrender to that reality, and it doesn't need to be that way. So what is creativity? Ultimately, well, if you think about 2 different thinking patterns that you may be familiar with, one is convergent thinking, one is divergent thinking. Convergent is the analytical. It's usually deductive. It's thinking about the logical validity of ideas. Divergent thinking is what we think of as more creative thinking. It's about coming up with all possible solutions to a problem without analyzing their efficacy. So just what could possibly exist. And you know, we would maybe a more colloquial term would be brainstorming, just coming up with all the different solutions to a problem. As children, we inherently will do both, but we will do divergent thinking in an isolated way. And what Dr. Land and his team determined in their study was that we are taught as children to actually combine those thinking processes. So instead of coming up with all various ideas, solutions to a problem, and then determining which is the most effective, we will self-select those as we go. So we are taught to simultaneously apply those things, which means that we don't get to those creative thoughts, those creative solutions. True creative organizations, creative individuals allow those things to play out individually. We come up with all of the ideas, and then we apply a rigorous method to understand how effective they could actually be. Okay, let's see here. And the reality is our society is not empowering creative play anymore. This, as with most things, is a problem that's even more particular in the United States. So in 1989, 96% of schools had at least one dedicated recess period. 10 years later, it was only 70%. In 2010, 50% of schools allocated less than 30 minutes per day. In Finland and Japan, children get 15 minutes per hour for creative play. And in the US, according to the CDC, only 22% of schools now require a recess period. There are probably a number of reasons to blame. Professor Andy Ellsworth at Bentley, I think, is an advocate for this, and somebody who I admire greatly, about the erosion of our creative thinking through standardized tests. And the more pressure that districts and that school boards and that teachers are made to have scores on standardized tests, it limits the ability for them to create more creative experiences for kids and let them live and breathe in that world. And as we grow up, that having the ability to create, it gives us the opportunity to codify our identity, to empathize with others, to understand our reality, to make sense of trauma. So in my case, having severe anxiety, when I'm dealing with that, I need to create. A therapist told me that I use humor as a defense mechanism. I do, but I think it's a fairly useful one, so long as it doesn't prevent you from getting the proper help. I love this quote from Salvador Dali: "There's only one difference between a madman and me. I am not mad." And the one point I want to make during Mental Health Awareness Month is that I think there's a conflation in society about creative geniuses having to be unhinged. And it's true that a lot of the creative luminaries that we know of also happen to have difficulty in their mental health. But that's true of successful business leaders as well. I want to say this unequivocally. I think that you can be very, very creative while also taking care of yourself. And you don't need to be unhinged to be a creative luminary. In fact, we are our best selves when we take the time for self-care. And you'll see that also can inspire more creative thinking patterns as well. So it's important to foster our own creative health. That we get that. I'm sure some of you are familiar with the idea of flow, which was developed by a Hungarian psychologist named Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, which I hope I pronounced that correctly. I never think I will. But the idea of flow is what type of activity do you get into where you lose a sense of time passing, where it's equal parts challenging, rewarding, it allows you to grow. It can be something simple, like for me, playing basketball is that. It distracts my mind. It helps me to relieve stress. I could play basketball for hours. For other people, it might be a creative expression. But he also went a step further, and he started to study the characteristics of a creative personality. And they kind of align. So there are 5 things: a burning curiosity, the ability to concentrate, the ability to find order in chaos, mental agility, and a willingness to take risks and accept failure. And that's a recurring theme that we will see here. I think that fostering creative health is a good path towards fostering mental health. And for these 3 reasons, we are able to translate our traumatic experiences into a creative output. So for example, going through COVID-19, nobody would wish that on our society. And yet, because it has had to happen, it happened, can we turn it from being a traumatic experience to a traumatic growth outcome? Can we, find ways to look for the helpers, to find art in culture, to, I like to think about all the other periods of upheaval, political unrest, war, famine, and some of the incredible creative entities and ideas and art that came out of those periods of time. So we think about, personal development. We have the hierarchy of needs. Another thing that I think is very, well established in pop culture. But I think there's kind of a fallacy to this. So the idea, for those who aren't as familiar, is that every level of needs, according to Abraham Maslow, need to be fulfilled before the next level up can be fulfilled. So if you don't have your biological needs met, then you won't seek out safety. If you don't have safety, then you won't find community, belonging, and love. At the very top is self-actualization, and included in that, under his theory, was creative expression. Now, the reality is that we feel we need to feel creative at all levels. So yes, if you don't have logical needs met, then you can't pursue creative expression in as meaningful a way, but you still feel the ramifications of that period, of that lack of creativity. And so the argument that I want to make is that, we need creative expression at all phases of our life. It's the reason why you have homeless artists near me in Los Angeles that are brilliantly talented artists who are selling their art out in Venice Beach, or through organizations that help to kind of package that and put that into workplaces and other facilities. In 1955, IBM set out to understand what made a great leader. And the parallels would really map to what makes a really a strong creator as well. They looked at the skills and the knowledge that it would take to become a great leader. And what they found was that actually those weren't as relevant as values and attitudes. So everything else that we talk to here is going to frame the conversation in against the idea of values and attitude sets. And I'll spoil this for you as well. I'm not going to be able to give you habits to make you creative. I will mention some, and I will talk about some that have both, research backed as well as personal anecdotal relevance to me. But the reality is you need to shift the way that you think about being creative. You need to shift things so that they still map to your own life experience. And that's what they found at IBM. They found that great leaders love blank sheets of paper. They love challenges that are open-ended, that don't have guardrails, where they can apply divergent thinking practices and come up with differentiated solutions. They are deep thinkers. They're deeply curious about their business, about their employee base, about the market as a whole, about where everything is going. And finally, they're ruthlessly honest with themselves. They want to grow. They're constantly looking for personal growth. And I've worked with a few leaders at big organizations who, there's a reason why a lot of them work with personal coaches to improve their own presentation skills, to improve their networking skills, to improve their team management skills, because they're constantly trying to grow. And that's true of all creators as well. This is something I want to spend a minute on too. It's a maybe for those of you who have MBAs or have worked, have studied business philosophy. This is one that I think you may be familiar with. But innovation is a concept. It's a Hindi term that essentially means winging it. And when you break it down to the studs, it means finding really simple solutions. I really fell in love with this when I was researching for the book, because I think it's been applied in so many meaningful ways around the world. These are the things that connect to the philosophy, right? Doing more with less, creating simple solutions, being agile. The biggest one I really want to highlight is viewing marginalized people as not only beneficiaries, but part of the solution. So instead of saying, how can we come up with a solution to help homeless people, thinking about how can we help empower homeless people to fix their own solution? How can we give them the tools to have that equality that they deserve? Same thing with underprivileged communities. There's a concept of arts-based placemaking where they put artists in impoverished communities, and in exchange for free housing, they have to give back to the community with art lessons and things of that nature. This has been applied around the world from companies like Tom's, that sell shoes, inspired by the idea in South America of people who made their own shoes, and then they give back to that community. Mohammed Yunus, who started Grameen Bank, which he pioneered the idea of microlending. So taking largely, impoverished, marginalized women in his home country of Bangladesh and giving them microloans of $10 to $20, which banks would have never done that. It wasn't a profitable thing. They were too risky. Would give them $10 to $20 to build their own business, buy a cow or for milk, or buy thread to sew. And over the course of a roughly 23-year period, the bank made over $5 billion in small loans to over 6 million people. What was most remarkable is that they had almost a 99% repayment rate, which means when you give people the tools to create for themselves, they will do so. We are inherently creative. We are inherently problem solving as a species. I talk a lot about empathy in the book, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I love the idea that creativity empowers empathy too. So for those of you who are looking to build a more creative life, one of the side impacts of that is that you understand other people and they will understand you. And in a world right now that is so fragmented, it's so bipolar and contentious, we need empathy more than ever before. And one of the side effects of this COVID quarantine is that we are all being broken down to the studs. All want the same things in life. We shelter and safety, and we want to provide for our family. We want opportunity to do meaningful work. This is a graphic that I put together in the book. It's a very simple idea, but again, it's about challenging assumptions, listening, truly understanding, and evolving your thinking. And creativity allows us to do that. Film is one of my favorite applications of that. There's a psychological principle called embodied simulation, which is when you see a film of somebody that has a different life experience of yours, but it's structured in a way where you see why they became upset, why they wanted vengeance, why they were scorned, why they fell in love, why they were motivated to do one thing or another. It helps you to understand rapidly why they may have experienced life that way, and you can apply that to your actual life as well. So creativity and creative expression really empowers thoughts of empathy. A moment on listening, but I found this to be a fascinating stat as well. The rate we listen and the rate we think is really high. So you may experience this in your business context when you're in a meeting and somebody's talking and you're just thinking about what you're going to say next. You're not actually listening to what they're going to say. Because your mind can't stop moving, and mine can't either. I know that my mind's probably closer to the 3,000 words per minute, and much of it is nonsense. So I can empathize with this quite a bit. A great quote again, a simple quote, but from Maya Angelou. You can't use up creativity. The more you apply these thinking processes, the better they will become. So this is what you came for. 24 minutes in, I had to set the stage, but this is what these are the systems that I put together for the book for how to impact and improve your creative health. And again, I want to say none of this is going to be earth-shattering. A lot of it is common sense, and a lot of it is something that you just need a friendly reminder around. But they're important, and they're often things that we neglect, even though we know them to be true. So I want to start with the first one, reducing dependence on technology. We are so addicted to our phones, to our devices. I know that that's true, of course. Now that we're stuck inside, the screen time we are overwhelmed by Zoom calls, right? We're getting fatigued by those things. There are three primary problems with being overconnected. One, we are bombarded by the micro success of people, of others. You look on social media and everyone's posting about how they did this, how they got this promotion, how they created this thing. It reinforces the idea that you are not doing enough. We are distracted, which enables self-judgment, which cripples creative expression. There's another kind of phenomenon that's interesting, that we underrate the action we take and we overrate the action we do not take. And that's emboldened by technology because, again, the constant stimulus makes it difficult for us to make strong decisions and to pursue those creative expressions. The one thing else I'll mention on this is it relates beyond creativity to relationships as well. There's been research that shows when you're at dinner with your significant other, with friends, if you even have your phone on the table, even if it's not on, you will reduce your enjoyment of that experience and the connection you're able to make with other people. We are so connected that we are trained, our brains have been rewired to look for that stimulus. And for those as personally, what I've started to do is when I'm out to dinner with my wife, I won't even bring my phone. It annoys the hell out of her because then she has to look up the directions and all that kind of stuff. But I want to remove the stimulus, and I want to do that as many times as I'm able to, when it's appropriate. You know, if you have kids or if you're at work or something, you need to be accessible. I get that, but finding opportunities to remove that stimulus. This is a diagnosable condition, nomophobia. A team at University of New York at Oswego developed a test for this condition. And a lot of celebrities have straight up gotten rid of their phones. That's not something you or I can do, but Ed Sheeran, Steven Spielberg, people like that have just gotten rid of their phones because it's getting in the way of their creative expression. Our phones make us also believe that multitasking is possible, and you can't really multitask. It's been proven. There's a great exercise called switch tasking, which Dr. Nancy Napier shared from a group called Potential Project. I put this in the book as well. And here's the thing, I'll have them share this out as well. But what you're supposed to do here is you're supposed to write these two sentences in order. So first, you take a piece of paper where you write, "I'm a great multitasker." And then on the bottom line, you would write every number 1 to 20 in order, as you see it here. Then you try it again, but you'd write, "I," then go down and write 1, apostrophe 2, and space A, down 4, so on and so forth. And switching between those things, yes, there's some buffer because you're moving your pen, But when I tried this, I'll share with you, the first time I did it, writing just both those things as they're written, I did it in 25 seconds. The second round, it took me 40 seconds. So it was more than a 50% increase in the amount of time. And the argument is that it actually takes your mind a split second to recognize what you're doing in between each of those switches. An average person in the US receives 50 emails a day at work in an 8-hour workday. That's 1 every 10 minutes. Many of you receive more than that. Every time you go to look at an email or respond to a text or do anything else, it can take up to 30 minutes for your mind to resettle and refocus on the task at hand. And this all applies to creative expression. If you're trying to write, if you're somebody who wrote in about finding, just moments to be creative, to, create a podcast, to start a blog, these things make it nearly impossible for you to find the time to do it. The millennials are the burnout generation, but it's not just us. Society has become a burnout generation. Let me know if this resonates with you. Simple tasks now feel overwhelming. Going to the post office, mailing your rent, responding to the census that keeps bothering us to rightfully respond to. You should do that, and I need to make time for it. But those simple tasks feel overwhelming because we have learned to believe that if we are not doing something that advances our career, it's not worth doing at all. And that is a tremendously impactful psychological detriment that also prevents us from creating things that may not have commercial appeal. Starting a blog just for your own sanity, or to express something, building a garden in your backyard, that sort of thing. The U.S. yet again is really stands alone in this front, right? Over 134 countries have made laws maximizing the work week. We are not one of them. We are facing that challenge now for those who are fortunate to still have jobs in this climate, that the workday has been dramatically extended. We're the only rich nation without the requirement for paid vacation. We're the only industrialized nation without a law protecting maternity leave. And because of all that, more people now that are over 65 years old are working than at any point in the last 55 years in the United States. We are a burnout society. And when we're burnt out, we don't have the capacity to be more creative. So what do I do? A couple of things that I do to try and make some more room in my day. I put an in the office message. I have an in the office message that if you email me in a period of time that I've blocked off, I don't just block it off my calendar. I will say, hey, I'm working, but I'm actually trying to write something right now. I'm trying to build a PowerPoint, and it requires some real divergent thinking. If you really need me, call my cell phone. Most of the time you don't really need me, or it could wait, right? It removes that temptation for me to constantly be looking at Slack or looking at my Messenger or Outlook and responding to those notes. I give myself micro rewards for productivity. This is especially important for when I'm writing books. Nobody reads my books. I'm so glad that you guys are listening to this talk, because I don't know who actually looks at it or cares about it, but it makes me feel good that somebody does. I'm writing them mostly because I feel compelled to do so. And that's another piece we'll talk about later. But so I need to really, really hone in on what will motivate me to do that, because there's not some external motivator. I give myself micro rewards for productivity. If I complete the chapter today, then I get to go to happy hour with my wife. If I wanted to play a video game, which I do, I need to finish this, this PowerPoint, and then I'll allow myself to do that. Small psychological changes that just give you more of a reward that is self-motivated to complete the task at hand. And again, make time. This is a big one. Teresa Amabile of Harvard Business School studied 9,000 individuals who were asked to work on creative projects. What she found is that they were most successful when they were asked to just work on one idea, one project per day, and collaborate with just one other person. And there's a book about this that was written by former Googlers, I believe it's called Make Time, actually, that argues the same thing. When we can focus on one project at a time, we can be far more impactful. So for those of you looking to create, that's another piece I would say. Don't try to, one of my friends from Bentley asked this. He's like, I want to do a podcast and I want to start writing a book and I want to do this. Focus on one. Focus on one and do it well, and spend the time you need to do it. Effectively communicating in real life. So this is one I really love, the idea being that we need to break the script patterns in our head, both for how we create and how we think about and talk to other people. When I consult with business leaders and I'm talking to them about being more creative and just being more personally connected, I give them a simple exercise. I say, I want you to initiate 3 conversations with people this week. It all start with weather or the day of the week. because we always talk default to when we're talking to people at work. Hey, gonna be a hot weekend, or I can't believe another snowstorm, crazy weather this year, or hey, it's Monday, wow, that's start of a new week, or Friday, can't wait for the weekend. It's a script that was built into our mind, and it's forgettable. If you deviate from that script, if you give someone a compliment, if you talk about a news story you saw, it breaks it up, it makes those experiences more memorable, and then you can cut into a more effective creative dialogue about actually coming up with a new idea, a new concept. Habits. I know that the book club is reading in habits. I love habits. One of the things I will talk about quickly is that you may have heard this fallacy that it takes 21 days to form a new habit. That actually came from a doctor in the 1950s who was a plastic surgeon. He noticed that it took people, his patients, anecdotally 21 days to recognize their new body. So if they were amputee or they had reconstructive face surgery, it took them 21 days to recognize themselves again. And that has been extrapolated, according to James Clear, out to mean that all habits take 21 days to form. But the reality is that even simple good habits, according to the University of College of London, can actually take up to 66 days to form. And I would argue that bad habits are much easier to form than good habits. So what that does is that if you haven't formed a habit over a 3-week period, you start to judge yourself. I wanted to write more, and I started to, and then it fell apart. I wanted to go to the gym more, and then it fell apart. Give yourself the patience to allow for that process, because it takes time. And you have more time than you think you do. You really do. Even those of you who are working hard, who have families, who have other commitments, one of the things that this whole pandemic has done is it's leveled everything out. And yes, we are busy. We really are. But I've heard it said, when we think about going back to normal, what are the parts of normal that are worth going back to? And I really ascribe to that. Myself personally, I'm having that dialogue. What are the things I really love doing that really mean a lot to me right now? How can I get more of those in my life when this returns to normal? I find that the time I'm spending with people on Zoom, a lot of it is with people that are friends of mine from back east. They're not friends that I have here. Some are, but I'm thinking, okay, how have I allowed my schedule to erode relationships? And now that everything's in same even playing field, how am I able to rebuild those relationships? These are the 3 things that I've kind of adopted myself, is to improve my creativity. Being patient. So again, be patient with yourself. It takes time. It's really hard. It's really hard to foster a creative habit, and that's okay. Keep it simple. Again, write 50 words a day, write twice a week, do a podcast just yourself, record yourself speaking a few times a week if that's what you want to do. If you want to start a garden, just plant a basil plant in your apartment, or do something simple that just gets you started. There's a lot of research into nature versus nurture. Some of it's kind of goofy. I'll share some of it with you because I think it's fun, but it may not apply. Research has shown that people are more creative when they're in dark or dimly lit rooms, when they're working amidst disorder. It inspires creative thought. When they take walks, when they write by hand, when they sit in rooms with high ceilings. There's all sorts of weird stuff. My favorite one showed that moderate intoxication led to, quote, sudden insights, and that was a 0.075% BAC. So I'm not suggesting that you imbibe to be creative, but there has been research on it. One that I really ascribe to, again, is the idea that 70 decibels of noise. Let me back up. I sit in coffee shops and write a lot, and I've always loved it. And you'll notice a lot of writers are in coffee shops. Well, there's a science to that. It's because the level of ambient noise in a coffee shop, roughly 70 decibels, creates what's known as process disfluency. It's a slight difficulty in your experience of processing information. Why is that important? Why would you want a difficulty in processing information? Because when you are fluent in processing information, it becomes in your subconscious, or it moves to your subconscious. It's why when you drive home from work, you forget the commute, because you're just so tied into doing it that it becomes habitual. Process disfluency, it's the same reason why when you cut vegetables or wash your hand or wash dishes, you have create moments of creative inspiration, because it breaks up those thought patterns that we're used to. Moving into a couple more things here. High growth experiences. I don't want to spend, again, too much time on this, but lean into experiences that make you grow. This is all about breaking the script that you are used to, your routines, finding new things to introduce there that you can apply elsewhere. If you want to become a singer, if you want to become a musician, art that's outside of that realm, and see how those and how that experience might apply into your songwriting or into other things that you're working on. This is a great quote from a songwriter that I interviewed for the book, who's become a friend of mine. And I think she's taken this from another source as well, that people put 10% of themselves in 10 different directions. I try to focus on certain things and do them very well. And I think that's something we all can use more of, because again, we aren't built for patience. Our society is not built for giving space and time to create, and we need to do that more. Identifying unique value. So this is a big one. What makes you you? What makes you interesting? What makes you important? Some of the things I talk about when I work with people in creative expression is they say, I just don't know what value I can provide. I want to write, but I don't know what to write about. I want to create, but I don't know what to create. So here's a set of questions that I come up with that I think might help. What do you enjoy doing regardless of the setting? What do people tell you you're good at? What would you get up super early in the morning or stay up super late at night to do, which is what writing a book is like when no one's asking you to do it. What makes you feel intense energy? Most importantly, if you assume nobody's willing to pay you for your creative expression, what would you do anyway? And there's some other ones too that I really love that I've pulled out from elsewhere. What made you stand out as a child? And what compliments do you tend to ignore? What do people not just tell you you're good at that you neglect, but what do you just gloss over? It doesn't even register with you that you have a skill, you have a talent, you have a unique value to give. This all kind of goes back to imposter syndrome. I love this photo and I love this concept of imposter syndrome. I'm sure many of you feel it, but I deal with this question a lot from people. I would love to create, but I don't have anything to say. I would love to contribute an article, but I don't think that my insights are very interesting. I would love to write music, but I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough at guitar to put something out there. I'd like to start a podcast, but I actually don't have anything good to say. Catherine Hawley is a PhD, is a professor in Scotland. She argues that imposter syndrome is driven by misplaced trust. In other words, we put too much trust in our own low opinion of ourselves, and we put too much distrust in the high opinion that others have of us. There's a quote I'll share in a little bit about this idea, but there are various types of imposters as well. And we all just kind of make our way through life in business. And I know most of you have felt this way at some point in your careers, but it applies in a very nefarious way to creativity as well. Because again, we don't feel good enough to do something. We need to break through that. You got to get over that piece. You have to just start with the habits. Here's a friend of mine, Ben, a great friend of mine from New Hampshire. I'm a proud New Hampshire native. And Ben and I grew up together. He's a really successful film director now. He directs music videos based out of Manchester, New Hampshire now. But I've really learned a lot from him as well, and interviewed him for this book. What he loves, he embodies the idea of bringing your own personal identity into a universal truth. And I really love that idea. Chat here. Oh, nice. We got some New Hampshire people. Good. 603, baby. Never forget. So anyway, Ben loves, Ben, what was I going to say? This idea of being negative. So Ben and his team, they've come up with a term where when anyone on set is just being negative or has imposter syndrome, is saying, we can't do this, it's too hard, it's too crazy, then they will say, hey man, you've got itis. That's their term. They say, you've got itis, and it's a made up word. And whenever someone uses that term, they all have to stand down and they just have to go with it. And it's kind of, it breaks the flow, and it makes them do work quickly. It makes them try things that they otherwise wouldn't do. And it's something I've adopted as well when I'm thinking this is a bad idea or I shouldn't put this out there. Taking purposeful action. So again, taking action, I want to be conscious of time here as well. Taking purposeful action that matters. Again, there's a lot of science behind this, which is really, really interesting. But remember that forward is a pace. One step at a time is important. One step at a time gets you where you need to go. This is a really interesting piece of science. A lot of people they think about fear, and they think that, like, for example, here's the example I'll use. If you were to see a lion, you may turn and run, and you would notice your heart rate would be up at 160 beats per minute. And you would associate that with that fear made you run. But the reality is that you saw the lion, your body decided to run, actually made heart rate go up. So your fear of action is actually the result of watching yourself fail to act, not the other way around. And this is where we introduce the tyranny of shoulds. So Emily and I were joking about this as well earlier. We judge ourselves for breaking a reality we establish. So a lot of people will say to you in, motivational speeches and all this kind of stuff, you should never judge yourself. And you say, I should never judge myself. But then you do. And so when you do, you get upset at yourself for judging yourself. And then you're upset at yourself for being upset about judging yourself. And that's what I'm talking about before. I've written a lot about this, but I still have bouts of mental health issues. And I get upset at myself for having them, and I'm upset because of them. It's a compounding impact. So what does that mean? It means that action precedes impact. If you want to reestablish your creative habits, start by small measurable impacts, and you can actually shift your emotion. If you start by just writing twice a week, you might actually re-engineer the fear that is preventing you from writing that book you were talking about. So again, some simple ideas, some simple concepts for what to do. Do nothing. We need creative play as adults just as much as we need them as kids. Introduce a creative outlet that is not what you want to do. Take an art class. Paint, draw, write if you want to be a musician. Do something that's different than what you want to do. Because the application of those insights into the discipline that you actually care about and have passion in will really kind of kickstart some of those insights as well. Take a shower, do something with your hands, chop vegetables, wash dishes. One monk actually told me, a former monk who's a stunt coordinator, told me that he calls it distracting your monkey brain. So give yourself something simple to focus on and allow the connection, the creative processes to connect in your brain. Do calisthenics, exercise. Come up with bad ideas. In an improv context, something that I really love is we do an exercise where we have to just do bad improv. So do bad scene work intentionally. Come up with bad ideas intentionally. It kind of frees you from that judgment of, what if this idea is bad? Well, the point is to come up with bad ideas. So you get that out of the way, and then you can start focusing on the good ideas. A few more here. Building a community. This is also important. As much as I talk about doing things yourself and avoiding technology, technology is fantastic for allowing you to connect to the other weirdos, as Seth Godin would call it. We're all weird. How do you connect with other people who are as weird as you and have your particular type of creative desire and can collaborate and can inspire you? I love this quote as well. One other thing I'll talk about here is Pixar. So Pixar obviously creates incredible award-winning movies. Every Pixar movie seems to win an Oscar. But it took the team 20 years to make their first fully animated computer-designed film. And when you think about a Pixar film, it's not one act of creative expression. It takes 250 people 4 to 5 years to build this film. It's called collective genius. And Linda Hill, who's a Harvard professor, talks a lot about this in a TED Talk she gave. She says that no scene in a film is actually complete until the entire film is complete, because a small idea can have a ripple effect. And there are 3 distinct qualities that make good creative teams at Pixar, which can be extrapolated to yourself or your teams. Abrasion, which is the idea that you celebrate differences in opinion and experience. You don't minimize them. You don't say, well, we're all the same. No, your idea is as valid. Your idea is as valid, but your experience is different. And that's okay. So when you bring those to the table, you can have contentious ideas and collaboration and come out of it with a more meaningful result. Agility, the ability to test solutions. So again, come up with those divergent thinking concepts and then apply them to a convergent reality and say, okay, now we've got all these ideas, how do we actually make them work? And resolution, making decisions. It easily could take 20 years, again, to make a Pixar film if they were too focused on the perfection of it and they weren't able to actually test results and make decisions on it. Okay. Failure. We had to talk about failure here. I talk about earning your failure in the book. You need to fail. My second book was about how societies and businesses talk about making space for failure, but never do, right? Like we don't actually allow our teams to fail. We're beholden to quarterly results. We're beholden to PPOs and KPIs throughout the year. We don't actually allow failure, and it's unfortunate. Earn your failure. I think about productive failure. When I'm going to try something like this talk or writing a book or performing in a show on stage, I think about, is it going to make me focus? Is something I can actually focus on, deliver my full self to? Is it going abilities? Is it going to make me do something different? And can I actually finish this? Can I actually see this through to completion and not drop it along the way? I want to earn my failure. I love NASA. When I was at Bentley, I got fortunate enough to experience a program called NASA Means Business, which was led by George Fishman, who became a friend of mine, who I really admire. And while I did that program, I learned a lot about NASA. And when I wrote this book, I actually interviewed a man named Roger Weiss, who was our connection there. Because I love the idea of studying failure at NASA, because I think about how do you create things for problems that never existed for humanity, like trying to put somebody on Mars, right? Or trying to put a big hunk of metal in space. And when I talked to him about failure, he said, there's different flavors of failure, but it's most compelling to think about the extremes. When people die, when you think about the Challenger, the Columbia disasters, Apollo 1 fire that killed people, other test flights. We hear about it now in the private space enterprise, where Virgin Galactic has a disaster and somebody dies. What do? They take the appropriate time to mourn. They pause their efforts. They research. They learn what went wrong. They make changes, but they never stop. And it's not to say that it's worth human life to make those advancements, but you would never make those advancements without continuing in the face of failure. And I think about that as a creative. And when I think about talking to you folks about this now, and I think, okay, what is the real price of failure? Who cares? Go do your thing. You're not going to die unless your creative expression is dangerous. There's not that level of risk. The risk reward is far outweighed in the rewards side of the equation. So I really think it's important for us to think that way. I love this quote. Again, I'll wrap it up here with a couple of pieces, but I love this quote. If that's true, then live life as if it was rigged in your favor. We know from 2020 it is not rigged in our favor, but live it as if it was. There's no reason for you not to pursue your creative endeavors, and just trust that they will work out, or you will pivot and you'll find some other reason for doing it. And the reason that boat is here is because there's a great quote that I love. John Shedd, I believe, says it, which says, boats are safest in harbor, but that's not what boats are made for. So untether yourself, let yourself go create. And the final thing I'll talk about is living for the process, removing judgments towards the outcome. And this is a fallacy, again, that I think a lot of creatives get into, which I do as well. I say, I want to write a book. My wife was challenging me on this because when I wrote this last book, it felt kind of empty for a while. I'll be honest with you. I released it. It didn't get a huge kind of pop. And I've always said I write for myself, and I write because I believe in this stuff. And I was upset. I was downtrodden. I was like, I wish people liked it. I wish people wanted to read it. I'm being very honest with you. And my wife was like, well, you always say you need to do this. You want to do this because it's important to do it. And I realized I was putting too much emphasis on the outcome. And a lot of times people will do that with their creative expression. You want to write a book for commercial success. You want to write a screenplay because you want to get it made. You want to start a blog because you want ad revenue. That's not the right way to do it. Focus on the process and let the outcomes happen. Again, James Clear, who writes Atomic Habits, has 4 fundamental problems with this. I'll highlight a couple. 1, winners and losers have the same goals. Goals actually are at odds with long-term progress, because if I set a goal that I'm going to write a book by January, I might augment my life for that time. I'll get up super early. I'll skip social things with friends. And we all do that. We do that at work. We do that in personal context. But when that book's done, it hasn't changed my life so that I can continue to create. And so we need to focus on the process. How do you find little moments of room in your day that you can be creative and consistently do that for the duration of your life, so that over time you will realize the outcomes you're looking for? And I bring it back to the tyranny of shoulds. This is a friend of mine who's a writer on late night shows here in Los Angeles, Delaney, who I admire very much. She told me to stop shoulding on yourself. Notice the difference in inflection there. Stop shoulding all over yourself. Stop telling yourself you should have done this, you should do this, you should have done that, you should not think this way. And instead, just change. Just change your habits, small baby steps at a time, and find ways to implement that in your life. Again, values and attitudes are more important than skills and behavior. Skills and behaviors can be learned. Values and attitudes need to be cultivated. And I think that that's something that we all have the ability to do. So when I bring it back to create hours a week, create, what should you do? Pick one simple thing and do it well for 5 hours a week. And trust me that over the course of several months, you will realize that it leads to the next thing and that you carve out more time to focus on it. Creativity, it's about applying your personal, unique value to a shared human experience. It can take any form. And many of you are probably already more creative than you thought that you were. But the reality is we can be more creative if we look back to the way we were as kids, the way we thought as kids, if we kind of reopen some of those neural pathways. So to recap, use tech, don't let tech use you. Take periods where you disengage. Take a day where you don't use your phone. Just if you're with your family and no one really needs to contact you on a Sunday, just shut your phone off. Don't even look at it. Engage with discomfort. Find things where you can try something that tests your paradigm, that makes you do something different. Evaluate your routine, your exercise, your sleep, your eating habits, your drinking habits. They all play a part. If you're not exercising, if I'm not exercising, I'm not creative. If I'm socializing too much, I'm not sleeping enough, I'm not creative. Start simple, and again, create with empathy and gratitude, most importantly, to yourself. And with that, I will leave you by where I started. What are you waiting for? You have the ability to change these thought patterns, to change these habits, to do more with your day than you thought that you could. Go do it. And be patient with yourself throughout that process so that you recognize that it will take time, that you're on a lifelong journey, and it will take you your entire life to realize your full potential. And that's okay. We're all doing it ourselves. I'm doing it just as well as you are. And I'm presenting from a dresser in my bedroom right now. So we're all on this weird journey together. And I'm really appreciative that you listen to me talk about this stuff. And I would love to connect to many of you. I'll share my personal email with the follow-up as well. I love hearing stories of people who are creating and talking more about this stuff. With that, I'll turn it back over.
All right, thanks, Bill. I know I am inspired. I had already told you I am the queen of shoulds, should've, could've, would've. So I appreciate all the insights you had. We'll just keep it going for a little bit longer. If anyone has any questions for Bill, I have some from the pre-submitted that I can certainly pose, but if anyone has any questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A box or into the chat box, and we can answer a few questions with our remaining minutes. I'll start with one that was submitted already, although you did answer much of these topics in your remarks. So you already talked, what are some ways, Bill, that you carve out separate time in your day? I know you've already sort of addressed this, but what are some ways that you typically do this on a regular day?
Yeah, so I put time in the schedule, whether I like it or not. And some days my creative expression, like right now I'm working on writing more scripts. I'm trying to do this as a side project. While I'm in Los Angeles, I'm like, hell, I'll try to write some screenplays and stuff. And I have a writing partner, and we write twice a week on the weekends and one night a week, after work. And sometimes it's really hard, and sometimes we don't actually get that much done, but we put it in the schedule and it's dedicated and we decide to do it. For me personally, I try to block my schedule out, and I'm bad at it. I don't always do it, but I find that when I do it, it makes a big difference. When I block out my schedule and say, an hour on Tuesday, I'm going to spend, writing to my personal LinkedIn, like some of the thoughts I've had that week about stuff, or jotting down notes about articles I would like to write, or, working on something that's important to me. It's about your schedule, and you have to put it in the schedule, and you have to stick to it, even if it's uncomfortable. But one of my friends challenged me one time, and he was like, but sometimes I just feel like shit, and I'm not going to create. I feel bad. We're stuck inside because of a pandemic. I can't be creative all the time. Yeah, good point. That's fine. Put it in the schedule, and when it comes up, acknowledge that, keep yourself honest, do something, whether it's read, or take notes, or do something that helps advance your creative thought, but just also be okay that it's not always going to come to you.
Awesome. And people want to know how to reach you next or follow along as you continue to write more books, perhaps. So what's the best way to follow? Do you have an Instagram, a Twitter, a blog you'd like to plug?
Yeah, well, my website is thebillconnolly.com because there's too many Bill Connollys, including a famous one in Scotland who I admire very much. And so thebillconnolly.com is great. If you want to learn more about their books, I've written in some stuff that I love talking about this. I love working with organizations and speaking and doing that kind of thing. I have an Instagram at Bill Connolly. I'll send some of this in the follow-up too. I owe you guys some more language for the follow-up email, and I'll put some of that stuff in there too.
Great.
I would love to connect with all of you and stay connected. And that's one of the great things about the Bentley community, especially for those of us who are no longer in New England.
Yes, we need to keep our West Coast alumni connected and engaged. And we will definitely, as Bill mentions, include a link to his website in our follow-up email. Jennifer Daigle wants to know, were you part of APO while you were at Bentley?
APO.
APO, yeah. I believe it's a theatrical group.
No, it's really funny. And actually, there's another Bentley alum that's in my improv group that's in Triple Decker Productions that I started with some friends out here called, his name's Matt Catanzano. Some of you may know, who's a good friend of mine. And Matt and I started performing, I started performing after college at Improv Asylum in Boston, North End. And then I moved to New York, and now I live in Los Angeles, and I've been around different theaters. But Matt and I reconnected in LA and started this show together. I've done, 100 shows with him, probably more. And he was a Bentley alum too. And we joke sometimes that we went to business school and we didn't know, And I know that they had it there, and it just didn't come to me then. That's part of my mission too, is to put this in schools, to find ways to get kids in high school to do improv, to see the value of it as a way to connect. There's been a lot, I could go on for days about this. There's been a lot of research and programs and stuff. But it's funny, I really wasn't, no. And I didn't find it till I was done with school.
That's a good segue into the next question from Kathleen Kerber from Exeter, New Hampshire. She wants to know, if you were able to talk to your 15-year-old self, what advice would you tell yourself?
Oh boy.
Loaded question.
Stop. Well, I would tell yourself to start now. I would say start now. I wrote a lot of fun stuff at Bentley. Greg Hall, who is like my idol at Bentley. I loved Greg Hall because I love psychology. I joke that I minored in Greg Hall because I took all of his classes. I wrote some good stuff in those classes, and I just turned it in for a paper and never did anything with it. I'm like, I feel like I would say to my 15-year-old self, start now. Start thinking about what you want to do, but just do stuff. Stop worrying about what's coming up. Stop worrying about what you should do or what you need to do or where it will end up. Just do more things and have fun with it. I was fortunate in that I did a lot and I tried a lot, but I wish I had removed the pressure from myself when I was 15 of being a good student and doing all that kind of stuff. I wish I just had leaned into, and it goes on too. Like, I had a breakdown at 23. I had another breakdown when I was 24 or 25. I wish I could tell all myself at those ages, hey, get the clarity and just go do stuff and be happy and be content. But when you're a teenager, it's tough because the pressure on those kids to achieve is so damning. I'd say for those who have kids at home, encourage them to be creative.
That's great advice. Thank you, Bill. If you're not getting the follow-ups to our emails, definitely feel free to follow up with me directly. My email address is ewilliams1. Like Bill, I have a similar common name dilemma. ewilliams1@bentley.edu, and I'll make sure that you are getting the follow-up emails so you're getting the recordings of these sessions. Thank you so much, Bill. It was such a pleasure to hear from you and connect with you today. And we're so grateful for all of you who joined us. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you, Emily. I really, really, really appreciate this opportunity.
Awesome. Have a great day.
Take care.